Hello, welcome to Racecraft once again. This time it's something a little bit different. We're going to replace the seals in the rams for the tonneau cover and the rear locks. But there's already quite a lot of really good videos on how to do this, so I'm not going to repeat all of that. What I do have for you is a little hint on putting the seals into the rams, because there doesn't seem to be very much information on that. So this is the ram out of the back of the Mercedes here. It's a Mercedes R129, and that's the shaft. That little green seal is the one that came out, which I don't think is an original Mercedes seal, but unfortunately it's split. Has a little bit of damage on it, but mainly it's got a split in it, and of course it was pouring oil out. So we have the new seal to go on. Now, the problem is that you've got to try and force this new seal over these threads here. And that is a really good way to wreck the seal trying to put it on. So what I would suggest you could try is putting a little bit of heat shrink over the end of the shaft. So I've got a little bit of heat shrink here. I'm just going to cut a piece a little bit longer than the threaded section. Now, I've intentionally chosen a piece of heat shrink here that just doesn't quite go on. It just doesn't quite want to go on. A good thing about heat shrink is that whilst it shrinks quite well, it'll also expand out a little bit as well. So if you put your long nose pliers in there and just go gently, if you go too much, you'll just split the heat shrink. Then you have to start with another piece, which is not a real big deal. Now, the reason that I'm using heat shrink that's a little bit on the small side is so we end up with as thin a wall thickness as possible, because you're going to be trying to push this seal over the top of this extra diameter that you're putting on. So there we go. We've expanded that out quite nicely. Slip it over the end of the threads there. And then with my cigarette lighter, just going to shrink it on. There we go. And then we just need a little bit of lube on there, which we can probably get from inside here. Okay, so I've got a little bit of lube on there now. Now our new tight seal just slips straight onto the shaft. So that's an easy way to do it. It protects your seal from the threads, and then once you've got the seal all the way on, you're ready to assemble the part, just pull your heat shrink off. Alright, so now I'm going to put the seal on for good. I've put it inside its little retainer there. I've put some oil on the shaft. I put a little bit on the seal there as well, and we should be able to just slide that down. And there we are, we're on the shaft, no damage to the seal. So now we can just pull the little bit of heat shrink off, and seal's mounted on with no damage to the seal. This is the ram for the lock. This is the actual lock itself. Now, whilst this doesn't have a protruding thread, it does have those little flats on the end. Let's take that off again. And the flats are actually quite sharp, so you could nick the seal trying to get that on. So I'm going to put my heat shrink on there, shrink it down. A little bit of oil on it. Oil in the seal, and same as before, just push the seal over the heat shrink. And there she is, she's all the way on. So now what I'll do is I'll put the little retainer on and make sure the seal goes right up inside. So all I have to do now is pull the heat shrink off, which comes off quite easily. Put the little retainer on, push the seal up inside there, and that's it. We're done, damage free. So I hope that helps. So put all the rams back into the back of the car, use that little trick with the heat shrink. Seals all went on really nicely.
we don't have any leaks, and the top works like a charm. As you can see, everything goes up and down. So everything's working really nicely. But whilst we were working on the car, we discovered that this centre vent wasn't working. The air was coming in through the side vents, but nothing through the centre vent here. So did a bit of YouTubing, and there was a guy who showed a distribution block that sits up underneath the passenger side where the glove box would be, but the passenger side footwell there. And he said that it may have dry joints on the soldered joint. So we pulled it out, resoldered all the joints and everything, put it all back together. We've had the radio out, we've had this out, we've had this out, we've had the glove box out, everything out. And it was none of those things. So this may or may not save you a little bit of work. If you've got the problem that this centre vent is not working, it could very well be the vacuum distribution block that is under the bonnet. And I'll get out of the car and I'll show you that in a moment. And that's what we found was the problem here. It had a little crack along the top of it, but it was enough to bleed away some of the vacuum, and the vacuum wasn't getting to that distribution block. I put my little hand-operated vacuum pump on it, and once we pumped the vacuum up to that distribution block, all this started to work like a charm. Once we found the problem under the bonnet in that distribution block, I haven't had time to get a new one. All we've done is put silicone sealer on it to seal it up, but works like a charm. We've now got plenty of air coming out through the centre vents. All the buttons work, everything. So maybe this will save you a whole lot of work if that's the problem you're having. So as I said, before you start pulling all the dashboard apart or buying new parts, new distribution block, all that sort of stuff, take this cover off, and here you will find the vacuum distribution block. It's got one line coming from the inlet manifold. It's that little white line down there. Comes in, goes, I think it's got about 8 outlets, and that goes off to all of the dash. That was the whole problem there. So really, that was like a 15-minute job to fix that. 3 days to find it, but 15 minutes to actually fix it. So I hope that helps somebody out there. So once again, thanks for tuning in.